Joel Natwick.
Are we on? Thank you.
We usually start this with, what are your qualifications?
I went to LeTourneau University and got a bachelor's in aviation, which combines flying and mechanicking. And then I came to Alaska pretty quick after that. I arrived up here in 1985, and the short version of this is I've been flying up here since '85.
Yeah.
And I have a whole bunch of flying time, and I got my ATP, and I've flown twins, and flown over to Russia a bunch.
Yeah.
And I have all these years I've been also working as a mechanic and got my IA in the early 90s, and I've been working as an IA. So I fly them and fix them.
Nice. You also work on, or fly rotorcraft, not just fixed wing.
That's right. I got actually the one and only semester that LeTourneau had a helicopter program. I went through that and went, along with one other guy, and got my private commercial and flight instructor rating in helicopters in 1984. And I always kind of wished I could fly helicopters, but it's hard to break into that with just very low time.
Yeah.
And so I started a helicopter company in 2010 and had to hire pilots, of course, but I mechanicked them and flew them a bunch because it was my company, and then now I work on state trooper helicopters. It's because of my experience working on these R-44 helicopters.
Nice. Yeah. So you started flying in '85 singles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you flying then?
St. Mary's on the Yukon.
Yeah.
So I flew up and down the Yukon out to where it braids out at the end and goes into. There are 3 different villages really on a mouth of the Yukon: Kotlik, Hemonik, and back then it was called Sheldon's Point. Now there's another name for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also upriver to Pilot Station, Holy Cross, Anvik.
Yep.
And of course sometimes to Bethel. And then who knows, charters that could go way into the interior as well. But the main flying, 90% of it was along the Yukon.
Yeah.
That first year.
And this was in a 185 or?
No, it was in a Cessna 207.
207? All right, nice.
And then in '86, I opened a base of operations for what was Herman's Air.
Mm-hmm.
And became Ryker Express, and had a single 207 in Unalakleet, flew up and down Norton Sound.
Yeah.
And then moved to Bethel and flew the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta for the same company. And that was the beginning.
Yeah. So how did your career evolve from there?
I was kind of a little bit burned out. I flew about 3,500 hours in that 3-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And wanted to go get some. In that 3-year period, I got my multi-engine ATP. I was flying twins. And I went down, decided to go for a year and a half. I went down and flew for the Federal Reserve out of Dallas and flew Lear Jets, twin engine Cessnas, and then Lear Jets. And couldn't wait to get back to Alaska and moved to Port Ellsworth.
Really?
Yeah. And I've been there ever since. I started out flying for Lake Clark Air.
Mm-hmm.
I was flying a Beech 18 and also all their single engine airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And then flew their Navajos too.
So what was it like? What were the biggest differences you saw flying out west and in the flying you had done before compared to flying out of Port Ellsworth? Were there significant operational differences, or?
Well, out west, there are benefits and concerns that you have to deal with out there that you don't have to think about when you're in a mountainous area. One of the benefits is you don't have to worry about running into the mountains very much.
Right.
You can kind of not be as concerned when the weather really goes down. The concerns are there are 200-300 foot slow gradual rises in the terrain that some people clip, they're flying full bore in bad weather. And also the whiteout experience is pretty bad out where it's treeless, and you're on the tundra. In the mountainous area, you just have to think more about how rapidly the weather's changing. What are you going to do if? All the ifs. If I run into icing in the mountains, are you going to press through it, or are you going to turn around? If you get into bad weather, do you have a plan? What's your escape plan?
Yep.
What happens if the weather closes in behind you, but it's really bad in front of you? And so it makes you be a little more cautious weather-wise if you're going to be safe.
Because having that out is not as easy when there are physical obstructions.
Exactly.
Several directions.
You got what's in front of you or what's behind you, and that's pretty much it when you're flying through a pass like Lake Clark Pass.
Yep. Now you touched on whiteout. That's something that can be really deceiving when you're looking at the METARs, and it can call 9 or 10 miles and good high ceilings, but you get down in it and with a low solar angle, good overcast and white everywhere, no trees, nothing. You have no horizon. So what were your tactics with dealing with that?
Well, first of all, I showed up in Alaska with 500 hours of flying time. And so they didn't just turn me loose. I had to ride around with more experienced people. There was only 5 pilots in my first base of operations.
Really?
But one day I was flying with kind of a crusty old guy, and I felt like we're at like 1,000 feet and everything's cool. But we were getting into whiteout, and I didn't worry about it because we're so high, right? And of course there wasn't any graphics like they have today. And I looked out at my right landing gear, and I saw brush going by 10 feet underneath that wheel.
Jeez.
No, I wasn't flying.
Right.
And the other guy knew exactly where he was and what he was doing. And he was very aware how close to the ground we were.
Gotcha.
I wasn't. And so I got to learn that stark lesson, which was like a heart stopper. That made me more aware of how deceptive it can be when you're out there. I've told my son and other people that I've taught to fly is that illusion kills in Alaska. The illusion that you're 500 feet above the terrain.
Right.
When you're really not.
Yeah.
And all it takes is a significant altimeter change by the end of the day. And if you're not on your game, you're not going to catch it.
Yeah. So when you're instructing in those situations, you're focusing on the situational awareness and making sure that your altimeter setting is correct and making sure that you know where the terrain is.
Yeah, and one of the Donald Rumsfeld had a statement having to do with going to war back in the early 2000s. I think it was the 2000s. Maybe it was the 1990s. But he said, it's not what you don't know that can kill us. It's what we don't know that we don't know. And that applies in the cockpit.
Yeah.
It's what you don't know that you don't know.
Right.
And if you fly with that mindset, you're checking and double checking all the time when you fly. Like, is this really where I am? Do I really know where I am? If you're in the murk.
Right.
Do I really know how high I am above the ground? Of course, nowadays there's all these graphics that people use that can help keep them safer.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes it a lot easier if you use it correctly.
Yeah.
But it can also be, if you've got it set up wrong, if you've got your altimeter set wrong and it's pulling off the barometer, then you can be, hundreds or 1,000 feet off.
Right.
Pretty easily.
Yeah.
So you started working at Lake Clark Air. How long did you work there?
I was there for like 3 full seasons.
Yeah.
And I had taken a leave of absence from that Lear Jet company to come up to Alaska for a summer. And that was '89. And by the end of that summer, that Lear Jet company had gone out of business, so I didn't have a job to go back to. So Glenn just said, well, we can't offer you full-time work, but there is some work if you want to just stay. And I was the first A&P mechanic to ever go live on Lake Clark.
Really?
Yeah. And then I think I was the first wintertime pilot that Glenn ever had, because he was a pretty small operation back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of how I got my start, full-time in Port Ellsworth.
And so you continued to fly out of Port Ellsworth for the next several years then?
For 3 seasons, 3 summers.
Yeah.
With wintertime flying,
Okay.
but not a lot. I mean, it wasn't super busy, but yeah. And then Glenn did some restructuring, and I kind of wanted to focus more on being a freelance pilot and a mechanic. I have a maintenance business, and he and I stayed the best friends through it. I just decided to go my own way, and still flew for him if he really needed me, and would help mechanic at times for them if they needed me, but got really involved in the maintenance side of life. And the freelance stuff was fun because it was flying for other lodges, and the hunting season type flying. And but Glenn and I were also both really interested in what was going on in Russia. And in '92, we started going to Russia quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is 3 years after the Berlin Wall.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was that like? Were tensions still high? Was it different so far from Berlin?
It was amazingly friendly and open. Scary flying in there the first time because I went by myself.
Yeah?
Yeah. Had a plane load of high school students. It was a student exchange type thing, and Glenn asked if I would take these kids over, and to be quite honest, I didn't feel like it. Didn't want to, but decided to do it. And I'll never forget crossing the Bering Sea and then entering Russian airspace. And you're talking to a guy who you can hardly understand. And I know he can hardly understand me.
Right.
But made it into Providenia. And then taxied off the runway onto a military ramp accidentally. And this is no joke, man. These guys came running out with guns.
Yeah.
Guys in uniform with guns came running straight at the nose of my Navajo. And all I could do was go full power on one engine and spin around and get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
And made it over to the civilian ramp. And I was met by guys in uniform there, which is actually standard operating procedures, border guards.
Yeah.
And that began my whole odyssey. I flew to Russia probably at least 40 times that decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were going from the Bristol Bay area over to?
Yeah, sometimes it was out of Port Ellsworth, direct Nome, into Providenia. Sometimes it was out of Kenai.
Oh, okay.
Other times it was out of Anchorage. So it was all missions related. Sometimes medical teams. for a while there, things were pretty bad in Russia,
Really?
and got involved in some humanitarian aid type flights. I ended up working for Samaritan's Purse and flying a Mitsubishi MU2 back and forth quite a bit. Got a project going. We called it the Salt and Net Project.
Yeah.
So they were they couldn't get supplies during those bad years. And we would bring in fishing nets and buckets of salt and then get them distributed to the villages up and down the coast of Chukotka. And I don't know, it was pretty satisfying work.
So you're working with Samaritan's Purse. Is that are you raising your own money to do this, or are they paying you? How is?
I never got paid.
Okay. And so that's just.
Actually, for a couple of years, I did get paid by Samaritan's Purse because I was project manager
Okay.
for Alaska and Far East Russia. So in that way, I was paid those couple of years.
Gotcha.
But before that, I did a lot of flying back and forth, and there was no pay. We just did it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, how long are you over the water there? A couple 100 miles?
Not quite a couple hundred.
Yeah.
And the route of flight is down to an intersection for an NDB approach into, well, back then it was an NDB approach, into a fjord that takes you into Providenia. From the time we got airborne in Nome until we were on the ground in Russia was about an hour and 40 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I guess it was a couple 100 miles.
Yeah. Wow.
Because it's not a straight shot, you have a dog leg in there.
Right. So the approach took you down to the mouth of a fjord, and then you turned in?
Outside of the mouth of the fjord, you'd hit the NDB intersection, and then there was an approach if we needed that it would take us to another approach near the field, and it was always NDB. But even back then, Glenn had one of those little Garmin 195s.
Yeah.
So like 93, 94, I think it was. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Very accurate. We used that quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's just that little, like, handheld GPS that you could. Yeah, I've seen a couple of those.
Now it seems so ancient, but back then it was like, holy cow, we're up there with the big boys.
That's awesome. So, did you ever have any mishaps going from the States to Russia? Or,
what kind of mishap?
like any problems with going international, or?
Yeah, I forgot to file my DVFR once.
Oh yeah. And so that's just a problem coming back, right?
That's a problem coming back.
So how'd that go?
They scrambled jets out of Galena.
No way.
Yeah. And I didn't know they were coming at me. And I contacted Nome Radio when I was getting not that far away from Nome. He said, you got jets coming at you. They've been scrambled out of Galena. You never filed your DVFR. I said, can you stop them? I mean, they're not going to shoot me down,
Right.
Just get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
I never saw them. They turned around.
Awesome. Did you have to file some paperwork after that?
No.
Nice.
Nobody ever got mad at me.
That's awesome. So, what about crossing that much water? Did you have any problems with mechanical issues or weather?
There's two things.
Yeah.
One of my flights was in a Beech 18, which is carbureted, of course, and also very prone to carb ice.
Yeah.
And on this particular departure out of Russia, I was staying really low level over the water because Gamble is only like 40 miles away from Providenia.
Okay.
and you can clear customs there.
All right.
Little old Eskimo guy on a 4-wheeler. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Perfect.
Yeah. But one of my engines carbiced up and was quitting, and I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
But it was only 300 feet off the waves. And so right away I got on the radio with Glenn and said, Glenn, I'm losing my right engine, man. And he goes, have you tried your carb heat? Oh, yeah. And that took care of it. But the engine was full-blown shutting down.
Wow. Yeah, 300 feet, that's got to be disconcerting.
Yeah, that was scary. Probably the water made it scarier.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, I was flying IFR out of Russia into Nome, and I had a partial panel situation where I ended up having to look at the artificial horizon over on the co-pilot side while I was shooting an ILS. I think back then it was a localizer approach. And that wasn't that scary, but still, you know, your partial panel, right?
It's extra work too.
Yeah.
And you've got the difference between the perspective that instrument is intended to be read at and then the perspective that you're reading it at, which is slightly off.
Right. I mean, back in those days, I used to never use the autopilot. I used to just always hand fly in the IFR system because it just makes you more disciplined with your scan. You're just always working the scan, and it becomes kind of ingrained. And that messed up my scan.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was an extra layer of work, you know, looking over there. But, you know, I mean, the ceiling was probably 800 or 900. It wasn't like a super low approach.
But still, on a localizer, that's
Right.
a pretty decent approach.
Yeah.
So you flew into back and forth to Russia over the course of a decade, you said?
Mm-hmm.
A few times, and then
Yeah.
where did your career go from there?
I became the director of maintenance for another air taxi in Port Ellsworth,
Yeah.
Lake and Penn Air,
Right.
and was with them when they went from a 206 to getting a Caravan and a 206, and flew for them, flew both, and was their main mechanic for many years.
Really?
Yeah. And then I started, like, in the process of being that lead mechanic for them, I started my helicopter company and then faded away from mechanicking for them and went whole hog into this helicopter business and ended up having a base of operation with 4 A-Stars and 3 R-44s and all of them in the air at any given time.
Wow.
Yeah. And decided to launch a helicopter, like a tourism business, because you can count on what's coming at you. People make reservations for certain tours and stuff way in advance.
Right.
And so then at least you know at least some aspect of the work that's coming at you.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do tourism and you're not a well-known name, you're sitting there long about February kind of drumming your fingers on the desk thinking, oh my goodness, I hope some kind of contracts come up because I still got to pay $150,000 insurance premium for the summer and I got to do this and that. And so I launched the helicopter tourism, landing on the glaciers, and it became our mainstay.
Yeah.
And what really made it launch was doing a video that I put on all the hotel rooms in the Anchorage Bowl. It was on the Alaska Channel on all the hotel rooms. And the tourism just went nuts. So, I mean, my first year in the tourism thing, we did, I don't know, maybe $300,000 worth of business. My fourth year, we did $2 million. And that's when I sold the tourism side of the business.
Yeah.
And the company that bought it, I mean, they really knew their stuff, their network, they knew tourism. They took it to a $10 million per person business in about 2 years.
Wow. And that's Alpine Air?
That's Alpha.
Alpha. Okay.
Yeah, real competition to Alpine.
Gotcha. So you sold the tourism side and you kept the maintenance side? Or?
Well, what I did when I sold was this. I signed a non-compete
Okay.
saying I would not do helicopter operations at all.
Oh, okay.
And I handed over the LLC that the tourism business was being run under, which was different than my just basic 135. And so I stayed away from helicopters then after that.
Okay.
And pretty much focused on maintenance, went pretty full time into taking care of state trooper helicopters and then doing other aircraft maintenance. Any flying I did was kind of for fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did have a 135 and flew my Cherokee a little bit on it, but wasn't my passion anymore.
Really?
I'm trying to slow down.
So you focus mainly on maintenance these days?
Yeah. Like, there's a helicopter in the corner over there that is all torn apart. There's no engine in it, tail boom's off. And that's an overhaul. And it's a fair amount of work.
Yeah.
So there's another one coming in the door in about 3 months, full-blown overhaul. And then we have breakdowns like this other helicopter sitting here where I'm working on replacing a component in it. And then of course there's all the inspections, the annuals, stuff like that.
They get 100 hours as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they get 100-hour annuals. We never sign off a 100-hour without making sure we do a complete annual.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So might as well.
Right.
Yeah. So you still have the Cherokee now?
I do.
How do you, and that's on a 135 ticket, or is that just?
It's not.
Oh, okay.
My 135 went, when I signed a non-compete, I went to fixed wing and had my Cherokee on it, but then I converted my 135 back over to helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
So a guy could use it in the lodge business last summer.
Yeah.
And now I'm converting it back over to fixed wing and I'll put my Cherokee on it just because I have to have an aircraft to put on it.
Right.
And I'll decide if I want to pursue business or not with it, or somehow let go of the 135.
Roger. Now, with your dual backgrounds in both flying and working on airplanes, how has that changed your perspective or given you a unique perspective when you're flying?
I would say that having a really good knowledge of systems and what's going on mechanically, things don't go bump in the night quite so much. It's pretty hard to get rattled when I'm up there, because I understand what's going on. If I hear a strange noise or feel something, it's like I think I just can think it through quicker or easier than someone who's maybe really timid about mechanicals and is always expecting the worst. This goes back to the 80s. I was a pilot and mechanic for Herman's Air, and I was flying. This is where the mechanical knowledge came in really handy. I was flying what's called a Cessna 404, a Titan, and it had geared engines. So it sounds like a Ferrari. I mean, the engines are screaming like 3,000 something RPM, and then the prop's turning about 1,800 or 1,700 or whatever.
Wow.
But there was an AD on those engines that if you had an alternator failure, at your next point of landing, you cannot get airborne until the mechanic pulls that alternator and makes sure the gear didn't fall off the end of it. Because the alternator's up on the gear section, at the gear reduction section of the engine.
Gotcha. So it could, a problem there could lead to a problem in the gearbox.
Right. And I was flying from Bethel to St. Mary's with a whole plane load of the local people. And I got an alternator failure light on the annunciator panel. At the same time, I felt a bump in that engine. And I thought, something's going on. I think that pulley just fell off that alternator. And about 3 or 4 minutes later, I was thinking, I wonder if that was my imagination. But then the engine blew. And I was ready and identified, verified, feathered instantly. It was just quick. I knew what was going on. Besides that, if you look back, it looked like World War II. The smoke was pouring out of the top of the nacelle because oil was burning on the turbocharger.
Oh, wow.
And so getting it shut down quickly, because of being intimately aware of the mechanics of that engine and the AD and what can be going on, I mean, I had it shut down in about a second or two. It was just fast.
Right.
And flew into St. Mary's on one engine and then told base that I'm coming in. I think I just blew the engine. I found out later that they were thinking, he's just a scaredy cat. He's got 100 hours multi-engine time, got his ATP, he's making a mountain out of a molehill. And when they popped the cowling when I landed, there was the connecting rod laying on top of the engine. It came right through the case.
Oh my God.
I also learned something about flying engine failure airplanes.
Yeah.
Because as you know, what do you do when you blow an engine? I mean, you trim, so you're not getting, your leg can handle the pressure.
Yeah, it's a lot of adverse pressure to continue to fly with.
Right. So I trimmed it and I was flying on one engine and it felt great. And I landed and it's a gravel runway. But a lot of power coming in because I was heavy with a bunch of people and they kept staring out the right side of the airplane looking at that dead engine. And I landed, I was so glad to be back on the ground, and I pulled the power back and my nose instantly went way over to the runway lights, man. I was and fortunately it wasn't an icy runway and I was able to keep it back in center. But I wasn't thinking that was going to happen.
Right.
You seem to be aware of it. You seem to already know that would happen.
Yeah, I had an engine fire a couple of months ago.
Okay.
Yeah, they shut it down over the chicks.
Wow.
But yeah.
So did you feel that when you pulled the throttle back?
I only had to fly for about 9 minutes. So I put in a little bit of trim, but I didn't trim it fully.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when I came down, it wasn't all that much adverse.
Navajo?
Yep.
Fuel line?
Yep.
Injector line?
Fuel line onto the turbo, burned the magnesium magnetos. I flew for 10 minutes, it burned for 9.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had the same thing happen in one of those Navajos. Only
Really?
I never caught the mags on fire. And I just had a massive power loss. Because fuel, like electricity, takes the path of least resistance.
Right.
So an injector line broke right at the distributor valve on the right-hand side of that engine. But a majority of the fuel was going out that little hole, starving the other cylinders, and of course the broken line had 0 power. And I was losing altitude and I was over Lake Iliamna until I feathered.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I didn't catch on fire in flight. I got caught on fire when I tried to restart in Igiugig. I landed in Igiugig. I'm glad I had a fire extinguisher under my seat because there was a lot of flames.
Oh, wow.
Because I had pulled the top cowling off and looked at it and I didn't see anything wrong. Well, the injector lines were underneath.
Oh.
And so I went back in and tried to start and it caught on fire. But got it put out, just burned up some wiring and scat tubing.
Yeah. Wow. So you've had a catastrophic engine failure, an engine fire, or an engine out. What else? What other kind of mechanical issues have you had?
I've had wiring burn up in the cockpit.
In flight? What's that like? That's a pretty acrid smoke.
It's an acrid smoke. It wasn't severe, but it was enough that it was concerning. I didn't know how if there was actual flames back in there, or if it was just hot wires burning up the insulation.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't that big of a deal. Blew an engine in a Lear Jet.
Oh wow.
Um,
What's that like?
You have a lot of power still left with one engine. I was flying for the Federal Reserve, so it was fairly late loads, just a bunch of canceled checks.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we went through company quasi training, and it wasn't very good training. And so, and I was left seat, and I came down out of 41,000 feet. Was able to hold altitude at around low 20s, and went to Charlotte, North Carolina. I was on my way to Teterboro, New Jersey from Birmingham, Alabama. And it was snowing hard in Charlotte, and the runways were slushy. So I came in with probably 10 to 15 knots more on my approach speed. And then touched down on their longest runway. I think it was 7,000 feet. But I didn't know that I would have 0 reverse thrust. Because when you have a dead engine, reversed on the other side gets deactivated.
Makes sense.
And had I known that, I would have had my co-pilot pull the parachute.
They have parachutes?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
But I didn't.
Yeah.
And all I can tell you is that we used every foot of that runway
Oh wow.
before we stopped. I mean, literally, actually, my nose was probably from here to the hangar door,
No way.
from the end of the runway, and then turned and got off of there.
Wow.
But it was $300,000 of damage to that engine.
Jeez. What was the cause? Was there?
There's a bearing that let go inside that turbine engine,
Really?
and it was a high pressure job. If you missed a deadline into a city by 5 minutes, all that cash checks the interest accrued for the next 24 hours. And so there was a lot of pressure to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And even back then, we had telephones in the cockpit. And I called base and told them what's going on. And also, first, to back up, I heard a whistle going on that was weird. And it was like this intense whistle that you normally don't hear. And any good Lear Jet pilot back in those days, I don't know what these new designs, would have a squirt gun in his flight bag, because you'd get a whistle through the inflatable door seals of the main door. So you just squirt a bunch of water, and all of a sudden that would freeze and stop the air from bleeding out.
Oh no way.
Yeah, for real.
That's wild.
And so I didn't think it was that. So I grabbed the throttle and pulled it back, and the whistle went down to nothing when I pulled to idle, and then back up real intense when I pushed back up on that side, but not the other side. So I called dispatch back in Dallas and said, here's what we got. I think I should go back to Birmingham, but I'm not sure if it's a real issue or not. But they said, keep going.
Yeah.
So I kept going. And the engine blew.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah.
So you were talking about how your background as an A&P has given you quite the leg up in these situations. What are some practical ways, besides just getting in the POH, that pilots who aren't necessarily interested in pursuing A&P but want to be safer pilots, how can they give themselves a leg up from the mechanical side?
Well, one way is for them to trend monitor their planes. So if they know where their oil temp's going to be on a given day with a given load, and I say a given day meaning is it a hot summer day or is it a cold winter day, you fly an airplane enough, you can guess to within just a few degrees of where that oil temp's going to be, right?
Right.
So that's a mental trend monitoring of what you're expecting that performance to be. Same with your CHT, although CHT gauges are typically quite fickle. If you have really good fuel flow gauges, you can trend monitor what's going on. And you'll start to notice if something doesn't seem right.
Right.
The other thing is, you start to get an oil leak that's abnormal. You know that you got to have somebody take a look at that.
Yeah, you're talking about like just burning more oil during the day's flying, or
Burn more and or seeing it come out the nacelle.
oh yeah,
But here's another thing that I've told my son this and other people is that at the end of the day, with the mags shut off, and to be double safe, pull your propeller through opposite direction rotation and feel the compressions in all the cylinders.
oh
If you have a problem develop, like rings going bad or a problem in a cylinder, you're going to feel one get really weak.
mm-hmm.
And then you got to make a decision. You got to have a mechanic look at it or not. But at least you know you have 6 consistent cylinders,
Right,
where you got 5 good ones and one that's getting really weird.
right, and you can kind of feel that pressure rise and fall as you go backwards through the.
Yeah, you can totally feel it.
Yeah,
You can do a compression check.
nice.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what have been the key things that kept you alive and kept you along the path of making the right decisions throughout your career?
Number one, I was double checking what do I really know here. What's really going on. Number 2, learning it's not a it's not a sign of weakness to turn around.
Mm-hmm.
One time when I was put to the test big time with that is on a summer day there were squalls. Maybe it was more like fall time. Squalls in Lake Clark Pass, and a new pilot, this young lady who was a fantastic pilot, took off and she was ahead of me, and I came into the pass probably 10 minutes behind her, and got into some murky weather, but she had made it all the way through, and I knew that. And then I had to decide, well, she made it, I should make it.
Yeah.
But I turned around. And there's a saying, I'd rather be on the ground wishing I was in the air than in the air wishing I was on the ground.
Yeah.
And Warren Buffett had a saying about investing. He said the secret to his success was he always sold stocks a little before he should have. So in other words, err on the side of caution, and don't be ashamed of your decision making when you're trying to be safe.
Yeah.
Don't be a hot rod.
That can be a hard line to feel out when you're coming up with 500 hours. You've never flown up here. You're not 100% sure what the limits really are.
You're right. And all of us who have come up have had to wrestle with that, right? So I would say that it's important to just say that up front to the chief pilots that I'm going to have to be really cautious here initially until I really learn the game, until I really learn how fast weather changes or what these conditions are like, or I learn the geography, the terrain. And I think really wise chief pilots and companies say, yeah, good for you, man.
If somebody came to me proactively and said, hey, look, I'm just so you know, I'm going to be a little slower starting out. I'm going to be a little more cautious starting out. I would respect that quite a bit.
Yeah,
That's a great
me too.
idea. Do you have there been certain mistakes that you've seen trip others up along the way that have been consistent?
I can think a number of crashes
Yeah.
where people have just been hot dogging,
Just trying to prove
just
that they could.
goofing around. And the other thing is overconfidence.
Mm-hmm.
in Port Ellsworth, anyone who's lived there a long time knows what death by airplane looks like.
Yep.
And in a sense, some of the crashes that have happened out of Port Ellsworth, of course it's always the pilot's decision, but I really question the wisdom of the elders, and I'm one of the elders, so to speak, now, who can easily say, yeah, there I was, and all this happened, and young people are thinking, oh, I can do that too. And also, this is more on the older people. I feel incumbent upon me if I see a young pilot take off in weather he has no business in, and I had to do this last year, I let them know.
Yeah.
They may come back safely, but it's like, you had no business. You had no business. And admonish them, and then also encourage them, you know. But we don't have the culture, I think, maybe in Alaska, anywhere, where we feel comfortable admonishing people, saying, you know, you got to think things through a little bit here. Don't do that again.
Yeah.
You haven't seen death by airplane as much as a lot of us have, and what you did was dangerous.
Yeah. You know, back when I was younger, I rock climbed a lot, and the way that rock climbing used to be taught was that it was an apprenticeship. For as long as rock climbing had existed, it had always been an apprenticeship where you're not going out by yourself until you've been climbing with somebody for at least a year or two who knows the systems, who knows the area. That's changed quite a bit now with it blowing up, and there's YouTube and stuff like that. And that's one of the things that I've found really helpful in aviation, is that if you can, as a younger pilot, just seek out mentors.
Yeah.
Because it's you may understand like the 3 or 4 largest contributing factors to the decision you're making today, but a mentor can come in with the other 17 factors that you're missing, that are both mitigating and exacerbating the decision.
Yeah, totally agree.
So developing a network, even as just a younger pilot, reaching out to older pilots or more experienced pilots.
I would have a lot of respect for a young pilot who would say, man, I was thinking about flying in the darkness down to so-and-so, not through the mountains, but what do you think? And I'd say, man, that's really cool. Do you want to talk about it? And I would sit down with them, and I wouldn't just say, no, don't go.
Right.
But I would say, here's some stuff that I would be thinking about. Weather's really a big deal now in the darkness.
Yeah.
And, well, here's another thing. Flying in the dark in Alaska is almost the same as flying IFR if you have overcast.
Yep.
And you've experienced that, haven't you?
Oh yeah.
First time I experienced that, I was not ready for it. I was shocked. I took off out of Hooper Bay. Nice light orange glow, but getting very dark on the western horizon over the Bering Sea. And then I turned inland to head back to St. Mary's, and I had to get on the gauges right now.
Yep.
But it wasn't IFR. There's no lights out there.
Yeah, there's nothing.
And so that would be a factor I would talk through with a pilot, you know, if they were gonna go at night, and let them know you need to be on your gauges, man. You need to be ready to be on your gauges.
It's really similar to the whiteout situation, where you can have reported good visibility in ceilings, and you can be perfectly legal VFR and have no horizon whatsoever. You have and even worse with both the whiteout and the darkness, worse than just being in daytime IFR is that you don't have the gradient of, oh, it's kind of brighter up and it's kind of darker down. It's just all the exact same shade everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that can be extremely disorienting, especially if you're not ready for it and ready to go on your gauges right away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So you've got the space here in Merrill, and then you live a lot of the time out in Port Ellsworth.
Mm-hmm.
You have a hangar over there as well?
I have a shop in my house.
Okay.
Right now I've got a Super Cub fuselage. It looks about like this one right here.
Yeah.
I'm rebuilding my Super Cub, but it's been a long project because I haven't been home enough.
Yeah.
So I can do a fuselage and I can do wings, and I actually really started my own maintenance business. The bulk of the work that I did when I first started the maintenance business in like 1992 was rebuilding floats for the lodges.
Oh, really?
So reskinning.
Mm-hmm.
Back then it was Ito 3430s, and that was good work in the wintertime. Nobody wanted to do it because it's messy and smelly.
Yeah.
But I could do it in my shop in my house.
What makes it messy and smelly? It's mostly aluminum, right?
It's aluminum, but you use an adhesive. I use an adhesive sealant called 3M 5200, and that's not so bad.
Yeah.
But the cleanup is horrible, and I was using MEK.
MEK?
Yeah, methyl ethyl ketone.
Oh, okay.
Cleanup tools.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's pretty nasty, but you developed a niche
Yeah.
doing that to have work throughout the winter?
Yep.
That's pretty awesome. You fly floats as well?
I did. I flew about 100 hours of floats, but I'm okay on lakes. For some reason, I got a thing about landing a float plane on a river. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like float flying on rivers.
Yeah.
And there's a salvage video out there where I go retrieve a Cessna 185 that all it did is have his engine quit while he was taxiing.
Really?
Yeah. And he ended up with a crushed wing down in the water and another wing way up a tree, and we went and retrieved that airplane and cut off the damaged part of the wing and spliced on a piece of good wing and got it out of there.
So he's taxiing on a river and loses his engine, and that's enough. The current just pushed him.
I mean, yeah, because the plane's just going to cartwheel down the river, right? Horizontal cartwheel.
Mm-hmm.
Wingtip will grab a tree and it's going to spin you like this, and then spin you like that, and pretty soon the wing went up a tree that was leaning, and the other wing went down into the river and got crushed just like that.
Wow.
By the current. But his cockpit was above water. He never,
That's good. And so that's, you've done quite a bit in salvage.
Yeah.
Airplane salvage. And that's mostly with helicopters?
No, it's mostly
Just
bending them straight or fixing them and flying them out.
nice.
John and I over there, we worked for a guy that had a history of Super Cub crashes.
Really?
Yeah, he always tried to hire the lowest time kid to come and fly a hardcore bush Super Cub flying.
Oh, wow.
And it's easy to flip a Super Cub over on his back.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I've done a bunch of that. Just getting ferry permits and getting the plane patched up enough to get it out of where it is and get it home.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you've actually got quite a bit of that on Tenellian Aviation.
On the website? Yeah.
Yeah, so you got pictures and videos. And
Yeah, there's 2 videos, and actually one of the videos was produced by that guy right there, John.
Yeah.
Getting a Grumman goose out of the ice.
Oh, wow.
In 30 below.
No way.
Yeah.
How did that go?
You have to watch the video.
Okay, I'll watch it.
Just hope you're not offended by AC/DC and some other good music. Oh yeah, the other video on the channel where I resurrect that plane and get it off the river. That music is taking care of business.
Nice.
Back when music was music. Anyway.
Hell yeah. Joel Natwick, thank you so much for your time.
You betcha. Yeah, I love what you're doing.
Thanks.